10 years ago, my parents shut the door in my face because my brother told one lie. This morning, that same brother came into my ER bleeding out, and I was the only surgeon standing between him and death. My name is Dr. Mara Caldwell. I am 33 years old, and I have not spoken to my family in 10 years, not because I disappeared, but because they believed the worst version of me without proof and threw me out like I had never belonged. I was tying my surgical mask when the trauma alert came through. Male patient, high-speed crash, severe abdominal trauma, possible spinal damage, blood pressure unstable and falling. In the ER, there was no room for memory, no room for old grief, no room for the girl who once stood on a porch with a suitcase and a medical school ID. There was only the patient, the chart, the blood, the vitals, and the next decision before a body crossed the line from critical to gone. I stepped into the trauma bay reaching for facts, because facts had saved me more times than feelings ever had. The paramedics moved around the stretcher, the nurses cut through clothing, someone called out pressure readings, an antiseptic mixed with rainwater and gasoline clinging to the sheets. Then I looked down at the face on the gurney, and every professional wall I had built inside me went silent. It was Nolan Caldwell. For 1 second, the room tilted around his name because Nolan was not just my brother. Nolan was the golden son, the charming liar, the man whose story erased mine before I could defend it. Behind the stretcher, standing like ghosts from a life I had buried, were my parents, Richard and Elaine Caldwell. My mother's hand was locked around my father's fingers, and my father looked pale, shaken, and determined to look like the man in charge. I did not speak to them first. I could not afford to become their daughter in that room. I looked at the chart, then at the wristband, and the printed name confirmed what my body knew: Nolan Caldwell. That was when the truth settled over me with clarity. The family that erased me was depending on me now, not emotionally, not symbolically, but medically. If I froze, Nolan could die. If I refused, they could spend their lives saying revenge had guided my hands. And if I saved him, I would have to put those hands inside the broken body of the man who had ruined mine. Before you ask whether I saved him, you need to understand what he did to make me lose 10 years of my family. 10 years earlier, before Nolan came back to me on a stretcher, I was 23, exhausted, broke, and stubborn enough to believe hard work would eventually make my family proud. I was in my second year of medical school, surviving on coffee, scholarship money, and shifts squeezed between labs. I had passed one exam when I went home, hoping that this time they would see someone worth celebrating. Instead, my parents were waiting in the kitchen like I had been summoned to trial. My father, Richard, held a stack of printed emails. My mother, Elaine, cried into a tissue, but her tears were not for me. Nolan stood behind them near the hallway, his face arranged into that wounded expression people wear when they know they are winning. My father said Nolan had discovered the truth. According to him, I had dropped out of medical school months earlier, continued accepting family money, lied about still being enrolled, embarrassed them, and forged documents to keep the illusion alive. He pushed the papers across the table like evidence, and my stomach turned when I saw a fake withdrawal email with my name on it and a tuition refund notice redirected through an account I had never used. The truth was uglier and simpler. I had not dropped out. I had earned a partial scholarship, and because of that scholarship, one payment had been adjusted through the school's billing office. Nolan had been secretly borrowing money from my parents for a business idea that was failing, and my success threatened the story he needed them to believe. The story where he was the child worth investing in, and I was the one grateful for scraps. I begged them to call the medical school. I gave them names, numbers, my student portal, everything. My father refused to touch the phone. My mother looked at Nolan, then back at me, and said, "Why would your brother lie about something this serious?" That sentence did more damage than the accusation itself, because I understood Nolan's lie had only buried me because my parents were willing to hold the shovel. My father told me I had made my choice and should not come back expecting sympathy. My mother looked away. Nolan stood in the hallway pretending to be devastated. I left with one suitcase, a trash bag full of textbooks, $42, and my medical school ID hanging from my neck. That night, I slept in a bus station bathroom and studied anatomy under fluorescent lights because I had an exam in 2 days. After that came 10 years of silence. They missed my residency match, my graduation, my wedding to Rowan, and every call I made until I stopped calling. Wedding invitations came back unopened. Birthday messages went unanswered. My family did not lose me, they chose not to look. And back in the ER, when Nurse Malik said, "Dr. Caldwell, OR2 is ready," I realized I had no more time to be their daughter. Because Nolan was family, the first thing I did was protect the patient from my history and protect myself from the accusation that history had touched my judgment. I called Dr. Celia Grant before I scrubbed, told her exactly who he was, and said I needed her in the room as backup and witness. Nolan was too unstable to wait for another surgeon, too unstable to transfer, and already too close to the edge for hesitation to become a luxury. I was the attending trauma surgeon on shift, already there, and trained for the damage ahead. Dr. Grant documented the conflict, agreed to stay beside me, and made one thing clear. I would stabilize him tonight, but I would not remain his long-term physician after the emergency was over. In the scrub room, hot water hit my hands, and the past came back in pieces I could not control. My father deleting his number from my phone, my mother refusing to open the door, Nolan leaning against the hallway wall and saying, "Maybe now she'll stop acting better than everyone." Me eating instant noodles in a hospital library because rent had taken the rest of my money. Me studying with a fever under a borrowed blanket because there was no one to call and no home to return to. My fingers almost trembled beneath the water. Dr. Grant saw it, but she did not make me feel weak for having a body that remembered. She only said, "You are allowed to feel this. You are not allowed to let it steer the blade." So I walked into the operating room as a surgeon, not as the daughter they had discarded. Nolan was already prepped, pale beneath the lights, surrounded by numbers that left no room for revenge fantasies. His abdomen was rigid. The scan showed internal bleeding, likely splenic rupture, liver injury, pelvic trauma, and swelling near the spine, almost certainly caused at impact before he reached my hands. I asked for suction, clamps, and blood. My voice sounded calm enough that anyone listening might have thought I felt nothing, but calm is not the absence of pain. Sometimes calm is pain obeying orders, pain obeying. The first incision was clean. Blood filled the field. I worked through the damage one decision at a time. Suction, clamp, more blood. Pressure is dropping. I found it. For a while, the whole world narrowed to tissue, vessels, timing, and the terrible math of keeping a body from giving up. Then for half a second, the room inside me went quiet, and I heard Nolan's voice, laughing to relatives I had not been invited to see. "My sister couldn't handle med school. Some people just aren't built for pressure." The scalpel paused for less than a breath, but in trauma, less than a breath can matter. I tightened my grip and kept going. I would not become him. I would not become my parents. My revenge would not be dirty. It would be exact. I repaired what I could, controlled the bleeding, removed what could not be saved, and fought his body until the monitors stopped threatening to take him. Nolan lived, but he did not leave that table untouched. The spinal injury remained uncertain, and he might never walk the same way again. That was not my revenge. That was physics, metal, bone, and bad luck. But I would be lying if I said some cold part of me did not hear the word consequences when I removed my gloves, stepped into the hallway, and saw my parents waiting, desperate for me to speak. Elaine moved first. She crossed the hallway with both hands pressed to her chest, like she could hold herself together long enough to hear the answer. Richard followed half a step behind her, still trying to wear authority over fear, but his face had gone gray around the mouth. My gown was marked with Nolan's blood. and for 1 second I watched my mother notice it before she noticed me. "Is he alive?" she asked. I kept my voice even. "Critical but alive." Elaine covered her mouth. Richard closed his eyes, relief passing through him so hard his shoulders dropped. Then my mother reached for my arm, the way mothers do when they think touch can erase distance. I stepped back before her fingers reached me. It was a small movement, almost nothing, but it wounded her more than shouting would have, because it told her the truth her tears could not undo. "Please," she whispered, "we need to talk." I looked at them standing in the hallway of the hospital where I worked, while my brother's blood dried at my collar and something old inside me went completely still. "You want to talk now?" I asked. "Not after my first anatomy exam, when I called and you let it ring. Not during residency, when I left messages telling you I was still here. Not when I mailed wedding invitations and all 3 came back unopened. Not on my birthday. Not when I stood in your kitchen begging you to call the school before you threw me out." People were close enough to hear. Nurses, residents, waiting families pretending not to listen. I did not raise my voice, and that made it worse, because calm truth has a way of traveling farther than rage. Richard started. You thought what he told you to think," I said. "That was easier than checking, easier than calling one office, easier than believing the daughter who had never given you a reason to doubt her." Elaine cried harder. "We didn't know." I leaned just close enough for her to hear every word. "You didn't want to know." Richard straightened then, reaching for the tone he used to end conversations when I was young. "You cannot just walk away from us." A quiet laugh left me before I could stop it. "You taught me how." Officer Dana Price stepped near the desk, calm but visible, and the hallway changed around us. My parents were no longer tragic figures waiting for mercy. They were adults creating a disturbance in my workplace. I looked at them one final time. "Nolan's care team will update you. I am not your emotional contact. I will not let this hospital become your apology stage. You will not follow me, touch me, or call me your daughter in this building after spending 10 years proving I was not one." Then I turned away before they saw my hand shaking. I made it to the staff room, then I broke. I locked the staff room door before my body could decide to fall apart in public. For a while, I did not cry. I just stood over the sink with both hands pressed against the metal edge, breathing like my ribs were tightening around my lungs. The woman in the mirror looked like someone I recognized and did not. Surgical cap, exhausted eyes, blood at the collar. The face of a doctor who had just saved the man who taught her family how to erase her. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Rowan." The hospital grapevine moved fast when a trauma case came in ugly, and faster when the surgeon walked out looking like she had seen a ghost. Her message said, "I heard about the trauma case. Are you okay?" I stared at those words until they blurred, because Rowan was the only person in my life who asked that question without expecting me to make the answer convenient. I typed, "It was Nolan. I operated. He lived. I am not okay, but I am standing." She called immediately. I watched her name light up the screen and let it ring. Not because I did not need her, but because I needed her too much. If I heard Rowan's voice, if she said my name in that careful way she used when she knew I was holding myself together with wire, I would break so completely I would not be able to walk back into that hallway. So I opened my locker instead. Behind my spare scrubs was the brown folder I had carried through apartments, hospitals, and every version of myself I had survived becoming. Inside were my medical school enrollment records, tuition receipts, scholarship confirmation, graduation photos, returned wedding invitations, unanswered emails, and screenshots from Nolan. I had kept everything, not because I spent 10 years planning revenge, but because people who rewrite history hate paper. The worst page was a message Nolan sent 2 years after my parents disowned me. "You should thank me. Without me, you never would have learned how little they actually loved you." I had never shown it to Richard or Elaine. Not because I forgot. Because some buried part of me believed proof would not matter to people who had chosen the lie. Then I found my wedding photo. Rowan and I were laughing under a white arch. and behind us were 3 empty front row chairs, one for Richard, one for Elaine, and one for Nolan. I used to think those chairs proved I had been rejected. Now I understood they had been witnesses all along. A knock came. Dr. Grant said Nolan was finally waking up, and he was angry. Dr. Grant walked beside me when I entered Nolan's ICU room, a reminder that this was still medicine, not family theater. Nolan lay pale against the pillows, surrounded by tubing and monitors. His eyes moved slowly, unfocused, then found my face. Recognition took seconds. Disbelief followed. "Mara?" His voice was rough. "What are you doing here?" I looked at the chart because facts were safer than his face. "I am your surgeon." His eyes narrowed, then widened. "That's not possible." "That seems to be the family motto today," I said. He blinked like the sentence reached him before the pain did. Then panic gathered. His hand shifted under the blanket and his gaze dropped toward his legs. "Why can't I feel them?" I kept my voice professional because cruelty would have been easier, and I refused to give him easy. "You suffered severe spinal trauma in the crash. There is swelling and possible nerve damage. It is too early to know the full outcome, but permanent impairment is possible." For a moment, he stared at me. Then his breathing changed. Not from guilt, not from regret, from fear. "No, I have meetings next week. Investors are flying in. Serena is going to lose her mind. You have to fix it." "I repaired the injuries that were killing you," I said. "The spinal damage happened before you reached my table." His eyes snapped back to mine, and something ugly moved beneath the fear. "So what? You want me to thank you?" "No," I said. "I want you to understand the difference between mercy and forgiveness. I gave you mercy because my oath required it. You do not get forgiveness because your body finally made you weak." That landed. I saw it in the way his mouth tightened. Then he tried another face, the one he had used whenever consequences got too close. His eyes filled quickly, too quickly. "We were young," he whispered. "I was stupid. I didn't know they would actually throw you out." "That is a lie." He looked away and the performance cracked. I stepped closer, not enough to threaten him, just enough to make him stop hiding behind weakness. "You knew what kind of father Richard was. You knew Elaine would cry and obey. You knew they would rather believe I betrayed them than admit you were jealous." His throat moved. "What do they know?" There it was. Not "I am sorry," not "I ruined your life," not "thank you for saving mine." "What do they know?" I repeated. His eyes flickered toward the door. "Does Serena know?" That told me everything. He was not afraid of the truth because it hurt me. He was afraid because it could reach his wife, his company, his polished life. "My wife cannot know about this," he said. "Your wife deserves to know what kind of man she built a life with." His face hardened. "You think you're better than me because of that coat?" "No," I said. "I know I am better than you because when your life was in my hands, I did not lie." Then I opened the brown folder. Nolan saw the papers, the message, the records, the proof, and for the first time since he woke up, he looked more afraid of paper than paralysis. I allowed Richard and Elaine into Nolan's room after the medical update was complete because I was done letting my family mistake access for authority. Dr. Grant stayed near the door. Nurse Malik remained at the medication station, and Nolan knew the room was no longer private enough for him to bend the truth into whatever shape protected him. He looked at the brown folder in my hands before my parents noticed it, and the fear in his face told me he remembered exactly what he had sent. Richard saw it next. "What is that?" I held it against my side. "Proof." For 10 years, I had imagined this moment so many ways that I thought I would feel triumphant. I did not. I felt tired. I handed my father the printed message Nolan had sent 2 years after they threw me out. Richard read it once, then again, slower the second time, as if the words might change if his regret arrived fast enough. Elaine took the page from him with shaking hands, and I watched her mouth move around the sentence that destroyed their last excuse. "You should thank me. Without me, you never would have learned how little they actually loved you." Elaine looked at the bed. "Nolan, what is this?" Nolan swallowed. "I was drunk." "You were honest," I said. Then I gave them the school verification, the real the one showing I had never withdrawn. I gave them the billing record proving the tuition notice had been redirected, the campus IT report a friend helped me recover years later, and the metadata connecting the fake withdrawal email to a device Nolan used that week. I did not explain every technical detail. The paper did enough. My parents had needed 5 minutes and one phone call to protect me. Instead, I had needed years to gather proof they should have wanted before punishment. Richard turned toward Nolan. "You told us she quit." Nolan's face twisted, and for 1 second I saw the boy underneath the polished man, furious that love had ever been divided in a way that did not center him. "And you believe me because you wanted to," he snapped. The room froze. He kept going because selfish people do not drown alone. "You were tired of paying for her dream. You hated how proud people were of her. Mom liked thinking Mara was ungrateful because it made ignoring her easier. You both wanted a reason to keep helping me instead, and I gave you one." Elaine made a sound I had never heard from her, something too broken to be a sob. Richard stepped back like the floor had shifted. For 10 years I had carried that story alone. Now all 3 of them were trapped inside it with me. I slid the papers back into the folder. "He lied. You chose. I survived. That is the whole story." Nolan stared at me with wet, furious eyes. "You came here to watch me suffer." "No," I said, stepping close enough that he could not confuse distance with fear. "I came here because you were dying. I saved you because I am a doctor. But now that you are alive, your legs, your marriage, your company, and your reputation are consequences you will face without me softening the fall." "You're cold," he whispered. "No," I said. "I am what was left after I removed the poison." Then I walked out. Behind me, Nolan called my name like a man realizing the door he slammed 10 years ago had locked from the other side. Dr. Grant found me outside the ICU before I made it back to the staff room. She did not ask if I was fine, which I appreciated because people only ask that when they want the answer to be simple. Instead, she said the hospital board was scheduled to finalize the promotion announcement that afternoon. For months, my name had been under consideration for Director of Trauma Surgery, a position I had worked toward through sleepless nights, impossible cases, and years of being underestimated by people who confused quiet endurance with weakness. She offered to delay it. For 1 second, I almost let her. My brother was in the ICU. My parents were shattered in the hallway, and my hands felt like they belonged to 2 different women, the surgeon who saved him and the daughter who had once begged to be believed. Then I thought about all the milestones my family had stolen from me. They missed my graduation because Nolan lied. They missed my wedding because pride mattered more than love. They missed the woman I became because accepting her would have meant admitting they abandoned her. I looked at Dr. Grant and said, "Do not delay it. I earned it. I will not let them steal another milestone." The announcement was small, formal, and meant for the hospital community, not my family. The board members sat near the front. Senior doctors stood along the side walls. Residents, nurses, and department staff filled the auditorium. On the screen behind the podium were my credentials, my trauma research, my surgical outcomes, my leadership history, and the awards I had accepted without a Caldwell in the audience. Richard and Elaine were in the hospital. They saw the announcement on the lobby display. I learned that from Nurse Malik, who said my mother stopped walking when my name appeared. Dr. Mara Caldwell, Director of Trauma Surgery. The daughter they believed had failed out of medical school was now being named to lead one of the most demanding departments in the building where their favorite son was fighting to keep the life she had preserved. When I stepped to the podium, I spoke about trauma because that was what the room expected. I said delayed action can cost everything. I said assumptions can be fatal. I said the body remembers impact even when everyone else wants to move on. I said saving a life does not erase what caused the wound, and recovery does not begin until the truth is named. Everyone else heard medicine. My parents heard judgment too. In the lobby, Elaine cried beneath the screen. Richard could not look away. For 10 years, the truth had been available to them. waiting behind one phone call they refused to make. Now it had a name, a title, and a white coat. When I stepped off the podium, Serena Caldwell was waiting near the back wall. Nolan's wife had heard enough to know her marriage had been built on a lie. Serena waited near the back wall with her phone pressed against her ribs, as if she were trying to keep herself from coming apart in a room full of strangers. I had met her only twice before, both times through the careful distance Nolan built around his life. To her, I had been the unstable sister, the dropout, the thief, the woman who cut off her family because shame made her cruel. Nolan had made me into a warning label, and for years she believed the packaging. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice controlled but thin. "He told me you had a breakdown. He said you dropped out of medical school, stole from your parents, and disappeared because you could not face what you had done." I did not defend myself. Defense felt too small after everything she had already heard. None of that was true. Her eyes moved over my badge, my coat, the folder still tucked under my arm. "I know that now." Then her face changed into the colder expression of a woman realizing her marriage had included rooms she was never allowed to enter. "How much of my life with him is real?" I felt the old instinct rise, the need to explain, soften, help, translate pain for someone else until mine disappeared from the room. I let it pass. "That is a question for your husband," I said gently. "I am not cleaning up his lies for him." Within minutes, Nolan began trying to control the damage. A nurse told me he was demanding Serena, demanding me, demanding anyone who would carry his version before the truth settled. He wanted me to tell Serena it was a family misunderstanding. He said this would ruin his marriage. Then, because Nolan could not recognize mercy without trying to invoice it, he said I owed him since I had already proved I could save him. I refused. Serena went into his room later. I did not stay, but I was close enough to hear her voice through the opening door. "You lied about your sister because you were jealous. What else did you build out of lies?" Nolan's voice rose. Serena's did not. That was how I knew he had lost the room. For one moment I thought the worst was over. Then Elaine found me near the hospital chapel, without Nolan between us. Elaine found me near the hospital chapel, where people lowered their voices because pain seemed more acceptable when it was close to prayer. She stopped a few feet away, holding the brown folder I had left with Dr. Grant to copy into the record. Her eyes were red, but I had learned that tears could arrive without accountability. "I read everything," she said. "Then you know." Her mouth trembled. "We failed you." "No," I said, "and you abandoned me." "Failure sounds accidental. What you did required repetition." She flinched as if the correction had struck her, but I did not soften it. I told her about the first night at the bus station, when I called her 7 times from a payphone because my cell battery had died and I was afraid to sleep. I told her about passing my boards and standing alone outside the testing center with nobody to call. I told her about mailing wedding invitations with my hands shaking, then watching them return unopened. I told her about those 3 empty chairs at the front of the ceremony, and how I spent half the vows pretending I was not hoping the doors might open. "I did not learn independence," I said. "I learned not to expect rescue." Elaine pressed her hand to her chest. "Your father made everything so hard. I thought if I pushed back he would—" "There it is," I said, still hiding behind him. She went quiet. For once, silence did not protect her. Richard appeared at the end of the hall, looking smaller than the man who had once filled doorways and ended arguments with one look. He came slowly, without command in his shoulders. "Mara," he said, "I was wrong." "Yes." I let pride make me cruel. I looked at him for a long moment. "Pride did not make you cruel, it gave you permission." He had no answer, and maybe that was the closest thing to honesty he had offered me. Before either of them could turn regret into a request, I spoke clearly. I would not be Nolan's long-term physician. I would not be his rehabilitation contact. I would not manage his appointments, coordinate specialists, become medical power of attorney, or list myself as an emergency contact. I would not become useful to this family now that the son they protected needed care. They trained me to survive without parents, and they did not get to act shocked that I had learned too well. Elaine whispered, "But we are still your family." "Rowan is my family. I said. She is my emergency contact. She is my legal next of kin. She is the person who showed up before anyone was watching. You do not have access to my life anymore. Richard's face folded. Are we just supposed to lose our daughter forever? I felt the old wound open, but I did not step into it. You lost me 10 years ago. Today you only found out I stopped waiting. Elaine sobbed then, reaching for me with both hands. I did not hug her. That was the point. As I turned to leave, Richard asked, "Can you at least tell us how to help Nolan?" I looked back once. You chose him, now choose the work that comes with him. Over the next few weeks, the consequences came without my hands on them. Nolan was transferred to a rehabilitation facility outside the city, where every update sounded careful, unfinished, and far less certain than the life he had built around certainty. His mobility remained unclear. Some days there was sensation, some days there was not. Serena separated from him temporarily, not with a dramatic announcement, but with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had finally stopped asking a liar for permission to trust herself. His company placed him on leave after the crash, and during the internal review, old financial inconsistencies surfaced, the kind of problems polished men believe will stay hidden as long as they keep smiling. I did not intervene. I did not call his wife. I did not contact his board. I did not celebrate when pieces of his life started cracking. I simply did not rescue him from the truth he created. That was the part my family could not understand. They thought distance was cruelty because for years they had confused my usefulness with love. Elaine sent letters to relatives admitting I had never dropped out, that the family had believed false accusations, and that cutting me off had been wrong. Richard sent a shorter version, stiff, ashamed, and too late, like a man apologizing to a locked door because he finally noticed the house was empty. Some relatives messaged me, some apologized, some tried to explain what they had heard and why they had believed it. I did not read every reply. I no longer needed public belief to know what happened. Then a rehab coordinator emailed a form listing me as Nolan's family contact. I stared at the line beside my name for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because 10 years ago, I would have mistaken being needed for being loved. I typed one sentence beneath it. I am not available for this role. Then I signed my name. That night, Rowan was waiting at home. No speech. No demand that I forgive. No warning about bitterness. Just warm food, open arms, and silence safe enough to fall apart in. I cried into her shoulder until my body finally believed it was not alone. Later, I looked at our wedding photo again. The empty chairs no longer looked like rejection. They looked like space. I could finally breathe. If you have ever been erased by people who needed a lie more than they needed you, I need you to hear me clearly. Being abandoned does not mean you were not enough. Sometimes people do not believe lies because the lies are convincing. Sometimes they believe lies because the truth would require them to change, apologize, and admit they chose comfort over you. Sometimes the person who hurts you first rushes to control the story because they already know the truth makes them look worse than the betrayal. For 10 years, I thought my family's silence proved something about me. I thought unanswered calls meant I had failed at being lovable. I thought returned wedding invitations meant there was something missing in me that even achievement, marriage, and survival could not fix. But the truth was simpler and harder. I was not impossible to love. I was inconvenient to defend. Defending me would have forced them to question Nolan, question themselves, and question the family structure that had always made his comfort more important than my pain. I saved Nolan because I am a doctor. I did not forgive him because he was injured. I did not comfort my parents because they cried. I did not reopen the door because they finally regretted locking it. Regret can be real and still arrive too late to restore what it destroyed. Tears can be honest and still not be a key. Doing the right thing does not mean handing someone the key to hurt you again. People kept asking what the revenge was, as if revenge had to look like a scream, a ruined life, or a dramatic confession in a crowded room. But the revenge was not Nolan's injury. It was not my parents' shame. It was not Serena walking away from a marriage built on lies. It was not even the promotion they had to witness after spending years believing I had failed. The revenge was this: I became the truth they could not kill. For a long time, I kept a wedding photo hidden in the back of my drawer because I could not look at those 3 empty chairs without feeling rejected all over again. One for my father, one for my mother, and one for Nolan. I used to think those chairs were proof that I had not been worth showing up for. Now I understand them differently. Those chairs were not proof that I was unloved. They were proof that the wrong people had removed themselves from my future. Not because I hated them, but because I had finally learned that distance can sometimes be protection too. So tell me honestly, if the people who abandoned you finally needed the person they threw away, would you save them, forgive them, or walk away after the truth came out? I saved my brother's life, but I did not save him from the truth. And for my family, that was the one thing more painful than death.